What's up, guys? Nick Skrip here live on the Fantrax YouTube, Twitter, and X channels here with my buddy Kevin talking Week 16 fantasy football. If you are listening to the stream, you're either a big fan of fantasy football, maybe in a dynasty league, or still fighting in the fantasy playoffs. Most leagues, this is the semifinals. You are one win away from cashing in potentially on some first or second place prizes, but we got to get there first, and I think streams like this will help. So, Kevin, it's been a while since we've been on a stream. I know we got two different schedules. We have a combined like 15 kids between us, and two full-time jobs outside of the fantasy world that keep us busy with wives and all those other fun factors as well. But what's been going on with you, man? How's life been? How's content been? Football guys, just open mic. Talk to us a little bit here.
Yeah, it's been good. I mean, once you got hired by Fantrax, you forgot us about us little guys out here. I never get to hang out, never get to go on the shows, but no, it's been good. Been a fun season. It's been a little grindy season just because of all the injuries and all that stuff with fantasy football. But other than that, you're still doing the dynasty content over at Football Guys, and then doing some, the YouTube stuff at the Debbie Real, college football stuff. But you know how it is, day by day, just trying to survive. I don't think people realize how much work it is to do this stuff with full-time jobs and families. And that's why I always laugh when I see people commenting how busy they are when they don't have kids and that they do this as a full-time job. Like, come on, you're not that busy.
Oh man, I think that's just like a big difference at the end of the day between like being busy and actually being busy when you have these little people that need stuff all the time. And sometimes, it's at times you don't want to help with certain things and they take up a lot of your time and attention, but you and I both know that it's completely worth it at the end of the day when it comes to our kids and in our family lives. And you and I have spoke many times out in the space just about how that needs to be put first at the end of the day. So I know we share that, but Kevin and I, if you're tuning in for the first time on something we've done, we used to podcast together pretty often back in the day, the OG days. Kevin's probably one of my first friends, my best friend in the space, does stuff for Football Guys. And Kevin doesn't just do like Debbie content, which I think a lot of people tie to him, but he's talking dynasty for Football Guys. He talks regular redraft stuff. So I think kind of like myself, I think Kevin probably, and I can't speak for you, but I feel like he probably prides himself in being a bit diverse in the topics that he covers in the way that he delivers content. He doesn't just write. He doesn't just podcast or talk on videos. So really excited to have Kevin here on the show today. Has been a minute. I feel like most of my content's like at weird times where I have a lunch break at work or like early in the morning and stuff like that. So I'm glad, both of us are not at work today and we're able to talk some fantasy football, but we're talking week 16. So share this with your buddies and stay tuned. All right, I just checked Twitter. I think they can comment now, Kevin. Didn't you say that?
I think so, yeah. The last time that I did a stream, the people were commenting from Twitter. You saw that it joined from Twitter, but we'll see. I don't know. We'll see how that works.
I think there's like 3 people watching right now, so I'm not, as nervous as I thought I was going to be, but we're good here. We're going to talk through the games. I'm going to put a game on the screen. I'm going to ask you first, what do you think about this game? It doesn't have to be like who's going to win. Maybe it's from a fantasy football lens. It's somebody that stands out, somebody you think is going to have a big week, maybe somebody you're nervous about. Open mic, you talk about somebody, I'll comment. I'll talk about somebody, you comment, we'll move forward. So let's start off with the game tonight, Thursday Night Football. We have the Saints versus the Rams. Open mic, Kevin, what are you thinking here?
Yeah, I think that, this is a fun game for Stafford. If you bought low on Stafford, if you have Stafford out there and you waited after the injury and everything that kind of happened, he's been crushing it. I mean, he's QB7 in fantasy points per game since he came back. And he's got almost, I think it's 19 fantasy points in each of his last 4 games. So like Stafford's a league winner, when you're looking at that. I think the Saints have been tough, but I do think that Stafford's ability to kind of carve up defenses, what he's been able to do, that pass rush isn't that great. I think that when you're looking at it over the last half of the season, the Saints pass rush has gotten worse. And if they give him time back there, I think this is a Stafford game where you're talking 3 touchdowns. I think that's something that can definitely happen. You should be happy if you have Cooper Kupp and Nakua and those guys too. But I think this is a Stafford game. I think this is going to be a lot of fun to watch. And then Kyron's been balling too, but I'm sure you're going to talk about Kyron. But Matthew Stafford to me is one of those like late round quarterbacks that still worked. If you had him in Dynasty, now you ride him out and you bought him for probably cheap. You're excited about it down the stretch. I think Stafford can win some leagues this year.
Yeah, his rise has been great for fantasy football. I think for redraft leagues, he was a guy you probably could have picked up off of waivers a couple of weeks ago, and then he started heating up. I think at one point we were kind of wondering, like, what sort of upside does Stafford have? And if you look backwards to how the season went, he was banged up at one point. Cooper Kupp was banged up at another point. So I feel like the fact that the three of those guys, Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua, are all healthy and they're all performing, says a lot to what his ceiling could be, because he is throwing for, multiple touchdowns a game and for some decent yardage. You mentioned Kyron Williams, just workhorse running back, 22, 24, 28, and 32 touches the last handful of weeks for 204, 112, 113, and 155 scrimmage yards. So he's just touching the ball a lot. He's producing yardage. He's doing well in that system. It almost feels like guys in that system with the Rams just perform well, and they find ways for them to perform at the end of the day. Derek Carr is interesting. I'm not saying go and start Derek Carr, but he is coming off of his best fantasy score of the season, 20.3 points, and that was without Chris Olave, who I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, should be playing tonight. But you look at Derek Carr, there's opportunity for him to have some sort of statistics, right? Number 12 in passing attempts, number 6 in deep ball attempts, number 10 in red zone attempts. So he has opportunity through the air. It's just a matter of him like connecting and making the plays. But it looked like, good last week. So I feel like that might be an encouraging sign this week, potentially to be a streamer. The Rams allow the 7th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So it's a decent matchup. What's your thoughts on Carr if you need to stream?
Yeah, I mean, he's okay. He's at QB2 level there, right? I think, the Rams do give up the fantasy points, but we have seen him come on. So, like, since week 10, they've given up the 6th lowest yards per attempt, especially in the passing game. So we've seen them kind of go the 10th lowest passer rating as well. So, like, we've seen that defense kind of come on a little bit down the stretch. So, like, Carr just worries me because we don't necessarily know if Carr is going to throw every pass. Like, Taysom Hill's ass is still out there running around, and like, he could take away some of his usage, maybe some of his pass attempts and those things. I know he hasn't had that many snaps. I think he only played like 20% of snaps last week. So he's out there, but all it takes is those 2 snaps where Derek Carr's in the red zone and they give it to Hill, and that ruins it for you. Can you trust that in a semifinal matchup? I don't know. Like, he scares the heck out of me. Derek Carr is one of those players that, like, I guess if you wanted to stream, you could maybe take that risk there. But I think there's other options out there that you might be able to kind of roll with, especially with the passing matchups out there. I'd be very hesitant with Carr. So that means tonight he's going to go for like 4 touchdowns.
Exactly. Real quick, you don't even have to have a big explanation. This was a question in the Patreon, P2W Fantasy Patreon. Would you rather stream Derek Carr tonight or play Gardner Minshew this week?
I'll take Gardner. I'd rather have Gardner Minshew. Minshew mania.
All right. There we go. All right. So we have a couple games on Saturday. So you have to convince your wives to let you watch football, not only on Thursday, but also Saturday and Sunday. We have the first matchup here, the Bengals versus the Steelers. It's not the first time they played against each other. Real quick, I'm going to point out Pat Freiermuth. He's had a down last couple of weeks in usage and production. I think it might be Mason Rudolph. I think there's a chance Kenny Pickett might play. Again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the last time he played against the Bengals was back in week 12, and he was the tight end 1 that week. He caught 9 of his 11 targets for 120 receiving yards and scored 21 fantasy points. So it was a huge performance. And I don't know if it was super fluky because the Bengals allow the 2nd most fantasy points per game to tight ends this season. So it's a very good tight end matchup. I think we're just hoping that, he's going to see the targets in this one, whether it's from Rudolph or Pickett. What about you, Kevin? What stands out in this game? Any thoughts on Freiermuth? Open mic here.
Yeah, I mean, Freiermuth, he has been bad. Like, when I'm looking at him and what he's been able to do, like, and he's only had like a 17% target share. And it's funny, outside of the meeting with the Bengals, he's only had over 30 yards in no games. Like, that's what's funny about this matchup is like, hey, he's been absolutely dog against everybody else. I think I'm going to go the other way on this one. And I'm going to look at, like, when you're thinking of this matchup and what it could be, I really think T. Higgins could be that guy for you guys this week. Like, he came on last week. You saw the touchdown. Everything was there. Chase is sidelined. He's out, right? So Higgins going to step up as that wide receiver 1. And the thing is he hasn't been really utilized in the red zone He's only had like 3 red zone targets, but now with Chase out, that's going to probably go up a little bit. I do know he's going to get shadowed by Joey Porter, but I think he can avoid it a little bit. And they move him around. So I think this could be the Higgins game. I think you're excited about Higgins. You have to love his first read share. It's almost at 20%. So I think that's going to jump up with Chase being out. So if you're looking for just targets, and volume, I think T. Higgins is your guy.
I agree with that. And he was one of my better calls last week. I had spicy takes, said it was going to be a T. Higgins bounce back. I said JSN was going to be a decent flex. But T. Higgins, when he gets work this season, week 2, he had 12 targets, 28.9 fantasy points. If you look at week 9, 9 targets, 19 fantasy points. And then this past week, 8 targets and 22.1 fantasy points. The big asterisk for him this season, I think people have thought, maybe he's, I don't know, taking a step back or just not super productive or, just completely second tier to whoever the alpha is, which we would think would be Jamar Chase. But he dealt with that rib injury earlier this season. And I think that was something that lingered because his snap percentage wasn't always where we wanted it to be, even when he came back from injury. So I feel like he's healthy. Now he has the opportunity to earn more targets consistently. And I think T. Higgins rest of season is going to be a good play. So I do like that call there. Joe, real quick, off the top of your head, Joe Mixon, Chase Brown. I think Chase Brown might be banged up. Do you think that usage is going to, if he's healthy, going to be sticky? I think it was 13 to 10 touches Mixon over Chase Brown. And it wasn't a blowout. It wasn't like they were, leading the game and they got Chase Brown involved. Do you think that's more sticky, the split between those two?
No, I mean, if you have Mixon, I think that you have to look at, even though Brown's been kind of going through there, I think he got first series touches last game. Mixon's still averaging about 20 touches in that time. So you're still getting touches from Mixon. So I'm not really that concerned about it. I think this is Mixon's backfield. I understand Chase Brown's doing well. And for a next year's play, he's fun because I think they could just roll with him. But as far as this year, no, I'm about Mixon. Touches have been there. Total yards has been there. He's averaging almost 100 total yards. And he has been getting some targets as well. So in PPR, I don't think you should be concerned with Mixon at all.
It's a good matchup, too. Steelers allowed the 12th most fantasy points per game to running backs and the 11th most rushing yards per game. So it's the top 12 matchup for running backs. I like Joe Mixon as well this week. Shifting over, Bills versus Chargers. What comes to mind here?
Oh, God, this is Easton Stick comes to mind. I can't believe we have to watch a game where Easton Stick is playing quarterback again. But, no, I think the big question is, are you comfortable playing Austin Eckler? I think that is where it comes down to. I've gotten a ton of questions about Austin Eckler all throughout this whole week in the DMs and everything like that. And his usage was awful last week. 40% of the snaps only played, only had 9 touches. And that's a problem, right? But I think the other thing is Kelly and Spiller haven't been great either. So that whole running back room has not looked good. I struggle with this. I don't know. The Bills have given up the 13 fewest rushing yards per game, second lowest missed tackles. They've been a really good rush defense. So I think if you're coming into this and you're in the playoffs and you in redraft or whatever else, I think Eckler has to be a sit. I think you have to move on and pivot. I mean, unless you have something out, unless you don't have anything out there on your bench. But I think Gus Edwards is a better play. I think some of these other guys that you're talking about out there are better plays than Eckler, and that's crazy to say down the stretch of the season. But he's just not looked good. This offense has not looked good. The offensive line has struggled. I do think it's more of a committee back that. I think is the big thing because you probably wanted to rely on Eckler down the stretch. I don't think you can do it anymore.
I'm with you, man. And we know that, we talk about these dual threat running backs in the league, right? We want guys to be like Christian McCaffrey. They can run the ball. They can catch the ball. Eckler's not that guy. I mean, if you look at the rushing, he's not that guy. No. We depend on his pass catching for the fantasy upside. So if you're just looking down, the weeks played, Week 7, 1 reception. Week 9, 2 receptions. Week 11, 2 receptions. Week 13, 2 catches. Even this past week, I thought, I was being ballsy and saying he's going to have a season high in receptions, and he caught 4 passes. So if he's not getting that high-level pass catching, what is his value? Because he's not going to do it on the ground. He's not going to rush for 100 yards. We know that. So I'm with you. I think there's a lot better of options out there. Now, like you said earlier, he's probably going to go out there and rush for 100 yards and catch 15 passes this weekend. But in reality, I just don't see it. So I'm very much with you. Another guy, though, that has been horrible is Stephon Diggs. I tweeted it out, and of course, content sometimes will get 10 likes. And then when I tweet out the fact that Stefon Diggs has been the wide receiver 54, wide receiver 54, wide receiver 16, wide receiver 52, and wide receiver 45, that got 900 likes on Twitter for whatever reason. So forget about content. I tweeted that out. He's been horrible. You look last game, the Bills beat the Cowboys. Josh Allen only attempted 15 passes. They were very much so game managing that one. James Cook put the team on his back. So that one's an asterisk. But what about the rest of these weeks? You look at Stefon Diggs, and it's not like he's not seeing volume. He's averaging 10.2 targets per game this season. So, maybe it fluctuates a little bit, but this is a guy that opened up the season very hot. This is a guy that we expect to be a top probably 5 wide receiver. I think it could and should be the bounce back week. I think the Chargers are just such a juicy matchup. And you might say, hey, they can game manage, like they did last week against the Cowboys, but you really don't have to, because last week was Dak Prescott and the Cowboys. This week is your guy Easton Stick in the Chargers, right? The Chargers allow the 3rd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers and the 3rd most passing yards per game. So if he's pissed off, if he needs to get right, what better week for Stefon Diggs to bounce back than week 16? And I think we're all hoping and praying for it, because he's been awful.
I think the thing with Diggs this week that you mentioned, the matchup is good at first, but I mean, he's got to be efficient. Like, he's got to get early efficiency with the targets that he gets, because this game could go out of hand. Like, you're just talking about this game, and then they just run with James Cook. James Cook's been sick, though. I don't know, like, what's going on there. Like, I think that's something to note. I don't know. Like, I think he was out, but I probably was just precaution. But sickness is going around. Trust me, everybody out there. Sickness is nasty out there. So, and so when you think of it, like, Diggs got to be efficient, right? And I think that's the thing that you have to do. Now, I will say this: the Chargers do a lot of single high coverages. Diggs has absolutely crushed those, and he almost has like a 40% first read share when he goes against single high. That's something to note. Like, and I do think, with almost said San Diego, with LA, the Chargers, they have the 4th most PPR points per target. That kind of lends the Diggs. Like, I won't sit Diggs, because I'm riding with my guy. I'm going out, like, if I have Diggs on my roster, because I'm one of those guys, like, if I have Diggs in my team and I don't play him and he goes off and I lose, I'm going to just kill, I'm just going to look at it and say, why am I doing this? I think everything lines up for a Diggs kind of bounce back, just based on the numbers. But yeah, I mean, he has been abysmal, though. That's 100% true.
I want to build off of that point about, not sitting one of your studs. I think a lot of times in fantasy football, we overthink things and we put a guy that should never be on our bench, and we watch him score 30 plus points. I want to know, and I'm going to spit out a couple things. Do you have that same energy with Bijan Robinson? We just saw what happened last week. He played 58% of the snaps, 8 touches, though. Tyler Algier played 50% less, but he had 15 touches. And it was strange, because the 2 games prior, Bijan Robinson played 75% and 78% of the snaps. So it was ridiculous to see such a plus matchup last week and him not to continue to work as a workhorse role. You look this week, the Colts, it's another great matchup. They allow the 4th most fantasy points per game to running backs and the 7th most rushing yards per game. Not sure exactly if he was in the doghouse, if they went with a different game plan. Are you trusting Bijan, knowing what he's done this season when he does get the work, and knowing it's a great matchup, but also knowing what happened last week?
There is absolutely no way Arthur Smith can ruin our week again. Like, I just think that, like, with all the noise and the narratives, and he looked like a beaten man in that press conference that he had earlier, they have to give him red zone touches. He ranks 31st in red zone touches. Can you believe that crap? Like, that is the number that stands out to me.
Not
I think
good.
from a redraft standpoint. So I'm in a semifinal in a redraft league, and I have Bijan Robinson. So this is just for me, just so you know, like, hey, I have skin in the game too. Who else are you going to start? Because I'll tell you who's on my bench, and it's a short bench. Zach Charbonnet? No way. Roshan Johnson? No. Like, when I'm just looking at my rosters, I'm not flexing them either. I think in standard half PPR, you absolutely have to start Bijan Robinson. I think the interesting one is PPR. Like, if you have a guy out there that you feel like can get touches and get targets, and you're like, hey, I need the safer floor. But at this point, you plug in Bijan. I like the matchup. I think the matchup is fine. They have, Indy's defense has been okay, but they allow the 10th most rushing yards per game. So, like, for me, it has to be Bijan Robinson. I just think that they open it up. And I think that if you're betting on any week, it's this week for Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, I think if you roster him, the worst thing you can do is not shoot for upside, right? We know that he has the upside for fantasy scoring, 18 plus fantasy points in 5 games this season. So if you roster him, would you rather get, I don't know, 12 points out of whoever, or are you just going to shoot that he gets 18 or he gets 15 to 20, right? I think at the end of the day, if you are in a semifinal, you are playing your studs because we've seen studs perform at a stud level. And I know last week sucked. We were all pissed off, but it kind of is what it is. We saw it happen earlier this season when he was like sick or whatever he was. And I think he bounces back as well. Anything on the Colts end, Minshew's been talked about as a streamer. This season, I think he's had 3 top 10 or top 12 performances, 3 games over 300 yards passing. He's thrown multiple touchdowns in 4 games. So there is some upside to him. I think the running back room's kind of up for grabs. I think Taylor should play. I think Moss got banged up last week. Michael Pittman Jr. got banged up. That's something to monitor. I think the only asterisk might be if Pittman doesn't go. I didn't look at the update for that, but if Pittman doesn't go and now you got Downs and Pierce is the 1-2, I'm not saying that that's like terrible because we've seen some good Josh Downs weeks, but it is an impact because Michael Pittman Jr. has been balling this week. But Minshew, trusting him this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can. I think just based on, over time when you're looking at what they've been able to do in terms of that quarterback, I think he's a fun quarterback 2-ish, right? Like, I think that Atlanta's pass defense has improved, but they're still not that great. I mean, he's a fun streamer. I'm starting Minshew in a few leagues just to have him stream there. As far as your Pittman point, so we have Adam Hutchinson over at Football Guys where I work, and he's pretty dived into it. So he did miss like that. He managed like a limited session on Wednesday. And he said that we'll probably know by tomorrow. So Friday is probably the day that we're going to find out if he does clear it. I think there's 2 things with that, though, that he talked about. He said that, one, they just suspended the dude that hit him. I can't think of the name for the entire season. So, like, will the league look at optics? Like, okay, we just suspended this guy for a year, basically for the remainder of the season. We'll let Pittman play now the next week that he did that. So I think that is, the big concern there. I think that, looking at the trends of the concussion and what we've seen in the past, he did say like 60% of players play. So back and forth. If Pittman goes, then I definitely Minshew. I think without Pittman, I do worry about it a little bit. But there's not a ton of options out there that you can kind of replace with that. So like that's also the way I look at it. I think Down's gonna have a big game.
It's been a while, and I think when we look back to Josh Downs, it's been a minute since he's been a good flex play. But when a guy has a couple of weeks in a row where he is delivering flex value, I don't think it's a fluke. I think there's a line you can separate sometimes for guys that might be a flex play that it's a fluke game. Maybe they have 2 good games, but he was having a good string of games right before he got banged up. I know that knee's been an issue, but I think he is due as well. Packers, Panthers. So. I'm going to start things off. Chuba Hubbard, I was not a huge fan probably ever, but when a guy's operating like a workhorse, I think you look for guys touching the ball a lot, right? 78%, 73% of the snaps the last 2 weeks here, 3 straight games with 22 plus rushing attempts. It's good volume, and he's been running the ball well. 104, 87 rushing yard totals the last few games here. Packers are a great matchup, allow the 3rd most rushing yards per game this season, 9th most fantasy points per game. So I think if you have him, you know that he's going to be on the field a lot. It's a good matchup, and you know that he's been fairly productive. And at the end of the day, voluming, is king, like everybody says for fantasy football, and he's seeing it.
Yeah, I laughed when you said that you've never liked him. But yeah, I mean, he's getting it. He's getting the he ranks 11. I think he's running back 11 in fantasy points per game. This offense is just like just watching this offense makes me sick to my stomach. It is. But again, yeah, if you're doing that, I think he's got a pretty good matchup. They can't stop the run. Since week 10, they've allowed the 2nd most rushing yards per game. Like and that's the area there. Like if you're looking for a matchup and you're looking to plug and play, that's what you do with Hubbard.
And other side of the ball, the other running back, I think we're hoping he plays. I know he's been a bit banged up. I thought last time I checked, it said finger and knee. So he had a little bit of 2 things going on. But Aaron Jones, the Panthers, we know is just a smash matchup. It's all running backs. We say that every single week when it comes to the Panthers. And week 15, he played only 48% of the snaps. It's a trend up. He's been banged up, but he saw 17 touches, so that was a decent sign. Do we like Aaron Jones this week if he's a full go?
No, I don't know. Like I think he's a running back too, but with all the dings and everything there, and The thing is, his matchup is fun. Like, I think it really comes down to like where you at in your roster. Like, if you have a guy that has played over 70% of snaps and his PPR gets touches and targets, I play him over Jones. Like, I value Jones. Like, when I was looking at my rankings, because I came prepared for this show. So I have Jones at running back 19. So I got him at running back 19, but it's a questionable running back 19. Like, I think that there's other guys that maybe are lower that have a little bit higher upside, like Ty Chandler, for example. Like, there's guys out there that James Conner at Chicago. I know Chicago's defense has been better, but you're talking about volume. Devin Singletary. Again, I know Cleveland's not a great matchup, but volume. And I think that's how I play with Aaron Jones.
There we go. All right. So Browns versus Texans. I think I want to start off by mentioning just David Njoku. I think he's been a high upside play. I think he's been fairly consistent. A lot of times for the tight end position, you're looking for a guy to score 10, 12 points. I know we all want to chase, Sam Laporta and Trey McBride output sometimes, but having a good 10, 12 points is good. But back-to-back weeks for Njoku, finishing as a tight end 2 for fantasy football with Joe Flacco, he's been playing good. Njoku caught 6 of 8 targets for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns in week 14, followed it up with 10 catches on 14 targets for 104 yards and a touchdown in week 15. I had to watch that against my Bears. Him just making play after play. He's been good. 27.1 and 26.4 fantasy points the last 2 games. For me, knowing the Texans are a top 10 matchup in points per game allowed and knowing what his ceiling is looking like with Joe Flacco, I think he's a must play, probably rest of the season or at least this week in a plus matchup.
Yeah. I don't think people know Njoku's been tied in 5 since week 7. Like, this dude has just been putting up numbers and just quietly. Like, I don't see how you sit him if you have Njoku in this league. Like, 20% target share with Flacco. First read share has almost been 20% as well. He's a 3rd in red zone targets in the league. So expect a tight end. So I'm all about that. And Houston's been god awful against tight ends and fantasy points in terms of wide receivers. I think they've given up the 4th most fantasy points per game, 3rd most receiving yards per game to tight ends. Flacco's got his number there. This is exactly what we're here for. Like, you're looking for a guy that's wide receiver 2 on a team. That's David Njoku. It's Amari Cooper to Njoku, but Amari Cooper's been struggling getting open. The separation has not been there. Your guy, Elijah Moore, I mean, he's just there. He's just there. Elijah Moore is just there. Like,
he's breathing. He's breathing,
running around, getting some cardio in. But I think one thing that's opened them up is that there is a threat of Elijah Moore and these guys, Cedric Tillman a little bit. Some of these guys that have kind of opened up things a little bit. Njoku just keeps feasting on single coverage. They're not double covering this guy, and he's just working with it. And Flacco's looking for him almost every single time he drops back. So for me, Njoku's a smash guy. I don't know how you would sit him.
Absolutely not. And looking at the other side of the ball, the Browns, man, it's a tough matchup in points per game allowed to pretty much every position. Do you trust anybody from the Texans, knowing CJ Stroud's going to miss, and there's been some injuries going on over there? Do you trust anybody this week to play?
How dare you with the Noah Brown shade? That dude's been just crushing it out here, right?
Yes.
I don't know. I think that last week the Titans had a really bad secondary. So that's where Noah Brown really kind of stepped up. I think the matchup this week, I think concerns me a little bit. I probably have him like wide receiver 4-ish in terms of where like I think he can finish there. Because when you're looking at it, the Brown secondary has allows the 2nd lowest PPR points per target for these wide receivers. So like that one scares me. I will say the guy that I think you could plug and play, like I just mentioned, is Devin Singletary. Dude is playing like 80% of the snaps, and he's got 30 touches pretty much the last few weeks. 3rd 100-yard rushing performance last week. He's looked really, really good there. And the Browns' run defense, they're okay. But when you're thinking of what they've given up, 6th highest rushing touchdown rate. So really what you think of a Singletary is like, I get volume, and then you give me that touchdown. If he gets you that touchdown, then you're talking about a running back 2 upside play there for Singletary. So I think Singletary is the one guy that I would say I'd plug in.
Yeah, when you look at points per game allowed, they are the most friendly, in comparison to the other positions, to the running back position. Not a great matchup necessarily, but he's been getting the work. He's the clear running back 1. He's had games of 150, 112, and 121 rushing yards on the ground. Some people have commented to things I've said on Twitter and said, I don't know if he's better than Dameon Pierce, but he's just really good for that system. Dameon Pierce was absolute shit at running the ball earlier this season. I mean, he had 4 out of the first 6 games. 4 out of his first 6 games, he was under 40 rushing yards. Like, I think that says a lot, especially when his yards per attempt were under 3 in a lot of those games. I came into the season fading Dameon Pierce. I just don't. I thought he was very volume based. He runs mean and stuff like that. He was cool as a rookie and a fun story. But I think Houston has just finally realized, hey, this guy actually does stuff when we give him the ball. We're going to give him the ball. Pierce is now nothing but a handcuff and probably not even one of the better ones.
No, I've been out of Dameon Pierce for I feel like ever. But I did write for Football Guys, like Nick was talking about at the beginning of the show. I do redraft content as well. So every year I look at running back rooms preseason, and I decide like who you should probably target and redraft. And my guy was Singletary over Pierce. I said Pierce is concerning. Singletary gives him that upside. I said by the end of the year you could be plugging and playing him there. But he's been good. Like he's just been solid there. It'll be interesting to see what they do next year. But I think Singletary's that guy in this matchup that I'm comfortable starting.
And he wasn't just like a random handcuff that now is starting to ball out. Like he's had significant touches back when he was with Buffalo. He was getting plenty of work before. So I like that call a lot. Lions, Vikings, 2 super gross teams if you are a Bears fan, but should be interesting. I'm feeling a little spicy this week with a guy that a lot of people don't like. And I'm not sure if you're a fan of him. I want to hear your thoughts, but I think there's positive signs. It's a top 10 matchup in points per game allowed against the Vikings. I feel like it could be a week that Jameson Williams could be a flex play. And here's why. You know, the yards per reception numbers have been fairly good since week 11. 2 catches for 44 yards and a touchdown in week 11, 2 receptions for 51 yards, week 12, 4 catches for 47 yards in week 15. I mean, we've seen the flashes of him doing what he had in his profile, right? Be an explosive playmaker, downfield threat, yards per reception upside. The significant note to me is 7 targets last week. And we could say, well, Goff had a big game. He threw the ball a lot. But all I'm calculating is, hey, we have a guy that has made these big plays, and now he's getting more opportunities to make big plays. And to me, if we're looking for an upside flex play, I'm sure there's more, safer options. But I think JMO might be a little spicy flex play if you want to have a little bit of upside. What are we thinking here?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I was about to get a Jared Goff love fest for the 76th time between me and you. But no, Jameson Williams.
Dog.
He got that usage last week, the spike. It's hard to chase that, though. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard. Like, I get what you're saying. But you got Jameson Williams in a lineup in December 21st. I don't know, man. I get a little worried about that there. And when you're thinking of it, they struggle. So this offense does struggle against too high defenses. So when we're looking at that, and Minnesota plays almost too high 70% of the time. Williams against too high has only had like a 7% target share. Now that also can be, numbers can be manipulated the way you want. So that also could just mean he wasn't involved in the offense then either. So there is like 2 ways to look at that. I think he's a complete boom or bust. So if you throw Jameson in there, I mean, that's the type of kid that has 3 catches, 107 yards, and a touchdown, right? Like this, he reminds me of, and I'm going to age myself. He kind of reminds me of like Deshaun Jackson, like early Deshaun Jackson. Like when you're just thinking like, hey, boom or bust plays, can he utilize that? They use him in the rushing. They give him on sweeps and those type of things. So like, I don't necessarily love the play, but if you're looking for boom or bust, like this comes also down, like look at expected points on your teams. Like I had a team that, me and Nick are in a league together where I am definitely an underdog. If I'm looking at that and I'm like, all right, I'm like a 20-point underdog, I might be able to throw in Jameson here and just get that boom. I might do that. That's how I would look at Jameson.
Yeah, I think sometimes you look. We got games on Thursday, games on Saturday. This is what, a Sunday game, right? Or is this a? This is a Sunday game.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah. So I think by the time you have Thursday and then 3 games on Saturday, you might have a decent idea of where you stand in your matchups. So then that's when you could probably weigh out, hey, do I want to shoot for 20? And if he gets 3, then it is what it is because I'm already getting smoked right now. Or I have a decent lead. Let's just have a cushion play of a guy that's going to give me 12 points. I think you can weigh out those decisions in fantasy football. There's some strategy behind it. Lions, Vikings, anybody else stand out? Anybody want to mention in this matchup?
Well, I think this is a really good fantasy matchup. I think the over-under is at around 47. So that's something to note too when you're thinking of points. I think, there's a lot of upside at every position. Quarterback, I think Mullins has upside. I think Goff has
Yeah.
upside there. Running backs, I think these are all guys that could finish as like running back ones or twos, like with Gibbs and Monty and Ty Chandler. I don't see any must sits in this game. I think that a lot of these guys, I think the question is, maybe this question for you, like if you're in redraft, you have shorter benches, like where are you at with Addison, right? Because like last week, wide receiver overall in PPR, 17% target share, really looked good. But he was kind of like, when you're looking at like with Mullins, he had some big plays, but the first read shares weren't great. Like he was getting like wide receiver 3 level usage, but he's just been efficient with it. Like, are you comfortable throwing in Addison over other guys at the wide receiver position?
Really dependent on who I have, obviously, which is the cop-out answer. But I think a lot of his big days are tied to touchdowns. So it almost feels like you're kind of chasing touchdowns. Like, has he had 100-yard receiving days twice, right? Has he had games where he's seeing good volume? Sure. We have the full healthy core now for the Vikings. But I think a lot when you just look at the stats of when did he have a big game, did he score a touchdown? Almost every single time he had a big game, he scored a touchdown. So for me, it almost feels a little touchdown dependent. He obviously needs to be rostered. I think that it could be a fun game, though, like you said, and I think both teams are going to come out flying through the air a lot. I know you mentioned Goff. I got to plug him. 5 touchdown passes last week, and Nick Mullins looked good. Nick Mullins looked good last week. I think if you look at his fantasy day, and people will say, "Oh, it was his first start. Could we trust him going forward?" He was actually pretty productive back in the day for the 49ers. So it's not the first time we've seen, Mullins be a productive quarterback when given the opportunity. So I think it's going to be a fun game. I think the fact that we're going to have both offenses cooking maybe gives you a little bit of faith for Addison, just seeing him make some plays with Mullins last week. So that's a good question, though, because again, I don't know if I want to chase touchdowns.
You just took a shot at me right there saying if he's rostered. I have him rostered, damn it. Like I have him on my roster here for.
Oh, he should be rostered. I'm saying he should be rostered, obviously. But I'm saying, maybe play. Commanders Jets Super Bowl preview sort of game here. I want to bring up Antonio Gibson. I think that there's a chance, and I haven't looked this morning at all, been running around, but I think there's a chance Brian Robinson does not play. Gibson last week, I think a lot of people were speaking about him being a guy that should be in lineups because, when Brian Robinson got banged up in week, what was it, 13?
Yeah.
They had the bye in week 14. Yeah, they had the bye in week 14. He had 10 carries. So I think that was like a signal, hey, Brian Robinson got banged up. Maybe Gibson could have, 15 touches in week 15 since he's going to be out, but he didn't. He only carried the ball 4 times. They had some other guys getting work in the system. I think the one thing that gives Gibson a little bit of upside is the consistency in the passing game. Since week 8, he's had 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, and he missed a game, and they had the bye, but he's had 4 weeks during that span where he caught 5 passes, and he's had a couple games finishing with like 40-ish receiving yards. The Jets, not a good matchup through the air. We talk about this every week. Decent matchup on the ground, though. Do we like Gibson as a running back if you're desperate for a guy to plug and play this week? If Brian Robinson doesn't play, do you have some faith?
No, I do not. I have no faith in it. I'm done with Antonio Gibson. I've reached my limit. I played him in a league last week, and he did not. I mean, he just disappointed. He got like 45% of the snaps, and he only got 9 touches, right? So, and that's the thing. I think that even with Robinson out, Chris Rodriguez has shown that he's kind of that early down guy. I do think that you're looking at that, hey, he could be taking away work from you. And that's the last thing you want when you're talking about a guy like Gibson is someone else taking away work from him when he's not producing and he's not being efficient there. I hate the matchup. I understand, though, you're looking at your flex, you got 10 guys starting, and it comes down to this might actually be a decision. Do you go Antonio Gibson or Tyler Boyd? Well, I'd probably go Antonio Gibson because he's going to get the volume, and you're just hey, I think that the expectations there are that he'll get at least something. Snaps will be there, volume's going to be there. So it really comes down to that to me. If you're looking at your roster, shallower benches though, starting A, and you have those other areas, I don't see how you can plug Antonio Gibson with confidence.
So another guy in this game that had a down week, but I think is lined up nicely to have a better week. And I think the quarterback situation is still up for grabs, but Garrett Wilson, the Commanders are just such a good matchup through the air for quarterbacks and wide receivers. and you look and you say, I don't know who's playing. You know, a lot of games, the quarterback play is very mediocre. But if we look at what he's done this season, 5th in targets, he's averaging 10.3 per game, 13th in receptions, he's top 20 in receiving yards, averaging 13 fantasy points, which is probably not like winning you matchups by any means. He did just have a good week in week 14 with 20.1 fantasy points, but is he a guy that, you know, despite whoever the quarterback is, knowing it's a pretty good matchup through the air and knowing that he is averaging over 10 targets per game, that you just kind of have to play? Is it that sort of thing, or do you still have hesitations with Garrett Wilson?
Oh, Garrett. You know, to me, the matchup dictates playing him, because when you're looking at that, he still ranks 5th in deep targets, 13th in red zone targets. You know, the Commanders play a lot of too high in their defensive setup. And Wilson's done really well against too high, and like almost a 40% first read share. Probably part of that is that the Jets have no one else, but they still getting the first read share. You have to like that. And this secondary is decimated. So like, that's the thing. Like, the secondary is decimated. You know, he's going to get the first read share there. And they give up a ton of points. They're giving up the 12 most PPR points per target to receivers this year. And that's on top of when they were healthy. So now that they're decimated, you're talking about this is the matchup you want. Like, if there's any matchup that you're looking for Garrett Wilson to explode in, it's going to be this one. So you have to play him. Like, you have to plug him in your lineup just based on the matchup, and just looking at it and thinking like, this game is going to come down to, can they throw the ball? This is a sneaky, you know, I think that this is a sneaky points game too. Like, I think when you're looking at it, I know the over under is only 38, but I think that we're going to hit the over pretty comfortably in this game. So I'm on the Garrett Wilson train this week.
I am too. I think it's just such a nice matchup. I think he's a guy that's going to get a ton of looks. So if he can only make plays out of half of those looks, then I think he's good enough to give you the fantasy points. So it'll be at least flex worthy, right? Interesting stat here. So he has 138 targets on the year. What do you think, off the top of your head? Don't cheat. What do you think the second wide receivers targets are on that team? So number 2 is Conklin. Number 3 is Breece Hall. But as far as the second most targeted wide receiver, what do you think that number is?
78.
Yeah, I mean, you would think, but Garrett Wilson has 138, and the second most targeted wide receiver on that team has 48, Allen Lazard. So it's wild how separated.
How much does Conklin have? What does Conklin have? I was trying
to close, 72.
Okay,
you said 78. So
I didn't listen to directions, damn it.
You started thinking. No, but that's how separated though he is from the rest of the wide receiver room. Next on the list here, try to get through a little bit more of these. Seahawks versus Titans. So I liked JSN last week. He did not have the targets that, you know, I thought he was going to have in that matchup. It was a really good wide receiver matchup. It was a good matchup for slot wide receivers, but he had that huge play, scored a touchdown. The signs for me were just pointing in the right direction in the 2 games prior, with him leading the wide receiver room in targets for back-to-back weeks. So he didn't necessarily score the most fantasy points in those 2 games, but I think the fact that, you know, in these tougher matchups, in these matchups where they want to push the ball or they have to through the air, he's the safety outlet. He has a small, you know, he has a very low AA dot at the end of the day. I think, you know, when you play good defenses, he's the easier outlet. So for me, I think he's maybe not consistently, but he does draw some flex potential. And, you know, I think what stands out for him is he's top 15, I believe, in yards after the catch. So he's a playmaker with the ball in his hands. I've liked him trending up. Do you trust him, though, as a flex play? Looking at this matchup against the Titans, top 10 in points per game allowed, and in top 12 in passing yards per game allowed. Do you like him this week?
Yeah, I think just the matchup, you hold him there. I think he's been super efficient. So the thing with him is, like, his just efficiency numbers are through the roof when he gets targeted. And that's the thing. Like, I do think that he's going to get targeted there. But the slot issue is probably the biggest thing for me. But I mean, depending on Lockett, right? Like, if Lockett's going to play that role in, I do think that they use JSN in a little different ways. I don't mind plugging him in. It depends on what you have there. My guy, though, like, I think Walker. I think Walker's the guy for me. Like, when you're thinking of, like, where he's getting healthier, played 56% of the snaps the last couple of games, averaging tons of touches, like 18 touches there. I know the Tennessee run defense has been really tough the last few weeks, and I understand that. But I still think that when you're looking at, like, the 15 to 20 touches you can get there, I think Walker comes in as a very solid running back too, especially with the quarterback stuff going on with with Geno and Drew Lock and those guys. If Geno comes back, I actually like Walker a little bit more because I do think that defenses are going to have to kind of, open up to that wide receiver room. I think if they start using DK, Tyler, and JSN and 3 wide receiver sets more, I think that just helps Walker as well. So I think the emergence of JSN is actually going to help out this rushing attack.
Yeah, I like Walker as well, especially just seeing, last week the workhorse numbers. I know a lot of people have talked about Zach Charbonnet and just historically this season, what that's meant. But I think Walker, when he's touching the ball at a decent rate, he's scoring good fantasy points. And he looked very good in that matchup. He averaged 4.5 yards per carry last week, caught a couple passes. He has 7 catches the last 2 weeks. I think that kind of stands out a little bit as well. But 19 rushing attempts versus the 80 saw the week prior. That is the volume you like to see out of him. And, he does have a shoulder issue going on, so we have to monitor that. But I think if he is a full go, then I'm in for this week. Derrick Henry, Seahawks are a good matchup. Down week last week, but if we're looking at weeks 12 through 14, Henry caught fire. He scored 2 touchdowns in each of those 3 games. So, I mean, we know that that's what he can bring. We know that, he's the bully running back. I don't know if he's going to consistently be 100, yard rusher like he's been in the past 4 games with 97 plus rushing yards. It's maybe not as consistent as we want, but he's a guy, if we're going to bank on somebody scoring 2 touchdowns, it's probably Derrick Henry at the end of the day. Is he just always a lock in your lineup?
Yeah, I mean, I have him. I'm starting him. I think the one thing with Derrick Henry, last week's game would look a lot differently if they didn't give it to Will Levis as a weird keeper from the 1. I don't know what the hell was going on there. That frustrated me as an owner there. But if he has that touchdown, that's exactly why you have Derrick Henry, right? Okay, hey, he's going to get those touchdowns in there. So I think what happened last week is going to put a little bit of a bad taste in people's mouths, but I still think if you're in it, you have Derrick Henry, especially in standard. You definitely got started. But Seattle's a good matchup for him. When you're thinking of 9th most rushing yards per game, giving up, and you like that. He's still getting around 50 to 60% of the snaps. So I still think he's getting almost 20 touches. The talent's there. He's actually when you look at his numbers, people are saying he's slowing down. Not really, based on explosive run rate, missed tackles forced, and all that. I think it's just the offense as a whole has been really struggling in terms of what they've been doing, and that offensive line is really bad. But all you need is that touchdown. And I think that Henry gives you that upside at that position.
Yeah, I think he's a guy that obviously has to be in your lineups. Every time there's a plus matchup, it just the lights go off that, hey, this guy can end up scoring a big touchdown. Anybody else in this matchup stand out, or are you good to move on?
Nah, we can go. We can move on.
All right, Jaguars versus Buccaneers. Weird situation. I think, have you heard anything? Is Trevor Lawrence just trending in the direction he's probably not going to play with the concussion? Is that what you've heard?
Yeah, it says he won't know more till Friday.
Okay, so there you go. So you got that asterisk. Obviously, Christian Kirk is out of the mix. He's been hurt. Zay Jones dealing with a hamstring injury. I think if you're trusting somebody in this matchup, it's a plus matchup for tight ends, and they allow the 2nd most passing yards per game, the Buccaneers. I know we didn't have the best week last week, but Evan Ingram, for the most part this season, has been very much Mr. Consistency. He's been a top 12 fantasy tight end in 10 games, top 7 tight end in 7 games. You're looking at the targets that he's earned, 11 weeks earning 7 or more targets, 8 weeks earning 8 or more targets. So when we look at a guy who consistently produces fantasy points, consistently earns targets, I think even with the backup quarterback, just knowing it's a good tight end matchup, it's a good matchup through the year. I think Evan Ingram is safe in your lineups, over everybody, in my opinion, versus, on the Jaguars. I know ETN's a dog and he's had a good season. And I know that, Calvin Ridley can have these splash weeks, but if I trust somebody, I think I'm trusting Evan Ingram. Yeah,
no, I think you hit it on the head there. I think, he's tied in 6th in fantasy points per game. He has 6 red zone targets over the last 7 games, so he's going to get it there too. They try to, when you're looking at what they're trying to do when they get to the 25-yard line in the red zone, they look for Evan Ingram. He's kind of their guy in terms of that. He scored all of his touchdowns this season over the last 3 games, so that's something to note too. Big target share there. I do think he's wide receiver 2 on this team this week. And so that's, again, something to note. I think the Lawrence thing, though, does hamper it a little bit. What is that going to look like? Lawrence is a dog, though. I have a hard time seeing, unless that concussion was really bad, him not being out there. But yeah, Ingram to me is the smash there. I'd probably stay away from Calvin Ridley right now. He just disappointed managers everywhere.
Anybody else in this matchup stand out as far as maybe a guy that, no brainer needs to be in your lineups, or somebody that has a good matchup you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, Mike Evans is the underrated,
Yes.
dude. Like, he's the most underrated fantasy asset probably of our time. Like, we always talked about like Cooks and like even Kirk and all these guys, but I think Mike Evans, when you look about him, I wrote about him for Football Guys this year. Like, I mean, he's averaging the third highest points per game that he's had in his career this year, so he's productive there. I love Evans against the too high, and especially with his first read share and everything there. Jacksonville's allowed the ninth most fantasy points per game, 10th highest yards per reception to receivers there. Mike Evans is a smash. He's probably going to win some dudes of weeks again. And then remember, everybody was saying, "Oh, don't draft Mike Evans, sell Mike Evans, all this stuff." And Mike Evans is going to lead some of these teams, some of these managers to the promised land this year.
I think that I'm on the same wave with Mike Evans this week. I think he's a guy that is probably going to push a lot of people into championships. He's had 5 weeks of 20-plus fantasy points. If we're looking at the Jaguars matchup, they allow the 4th most passing yards per game this season. So we've seen the big days out of Mike Evans, and I think whenever you have a guy that can score 20-plus points, and he's done it a bunch of times, he's got the touchdown upside, and it's a plus matchup. This is what you look forward to in the fantasy playoffs. So very much in on Mike Evans this week as well. The Cardinals face my Bears this week. I think everything on paper lines up. You know, the Bears are a top 5 matchup in points per game allowed to tight ends. Trey McBride, everything just lines up for him to have just a massive week. And we see the difference that he makes for the tight end position. You don't have a lot of guys scoring over 20 fantasy points the way that this guy does. 25.5 week 8, 21.1 week 10, 22.9 week 13, 20.2 in week 15. If we look at, you know, his role on the Cardinals, I think it's very much, you know, what Travis Kelce has been to the Chiefs historically, right? I'm not saying Trey McBride is Travis Kelce. I'm not saying that. I'm saying his role for the Cardinals is the same role that, you know, Travis Kelce's had for the Chiefs. He is the number 1 target for Kyler Murray. You know, Marquise Brown had a good connection with Murray last season. They were college teammates, right? And you got Michael Wilson, who might get healthy and play some more. Rondale Moore like runs around and makes some plays from time to time. But if we're looking at like a tight end that is the number 1 target in his offense, it's Trey McBride. And he's a guy that can score 20-plus fantasy points on any given week. And I think Chicago is just, you know, they're like you said earlier, the defense has been playing better. They've actually looked, you know, okay. But McBride just set up so nicely to explode this week.
I want to give you props because you took some shit over the offseason about Trey McBride and on social media. And we had some people at my company who I don't necessarily associate myself with. They took some shot about you with McBride and said he's not very good. Well, look at now, because McBride is pretty much a top 5 guy and you're looking at what he's been able to do. Yeah, I think you have to start him elite in red zone targets. Anything that you have there, like you have to say like 11th, you know, this defense is giving up the 11th most receiving yards per game too, and the fantasy matchup there. So yeah, McBride to me is fun. You know who's actually also been pretty good? Cole Kmet, tied in 8 fantasy points per game. 6 in red zone targets, 2nd in total touchdowns among tight ends. Like, you have to like that. I think both of these guys are kind of must starts in this matchup at the tight end position. And it's really weird because Kmet was on that border, right? So was McBride this season. Like, hey, can we trust these guys? Especially after last year, I think people like were really concerned with Kmet there. But he's looked really good. He's kind of their safety blanket in the red zone. When you're watching Fields play in this offense, and you watched it a lot more than I do, but you know, when you're looking at it, like he's the guy they look for. He's the red zone target that you want. I think both of these guys have a fun matchup.
And McBride, really quick, I want to point out the biggest indicator. I don't care what school he went to at the end of the day. If he went to, you know, Joliet, which is a school, junior college, maybe if he went to Joliet Junior College, or if he went to just Northwestern or DePaul, like I'm just naming random universities. Whenever a guy in college at the tight end position finishes a year with 90 catches for 1,121 receiving yards, I don't give a shit who your competition is. He was a wide receiver in college. So everything pointed in the direction of Trey McBride being a pass-catching tight end in the NFL. And when a guy does that in college, I don't care, again, what the competition is, and it translates to the NFL, it almost is like 2 + 2 is 4 sometimes. You know, you got a guy who can make plays and handle volume. He handled volume in college. It was on his profile. So I love McBride balling out. I'm very, very high on him in Dynasty. I've made some big moves for him. Really like that. I like the point of Kmet. I don't think, you know, I don't think Cole Kmet gets a ton of love. I know some people have been like truthers and this and that, but, you know, maybe he doesn't score 20 points every week, but he's had weeks 27-ish, 23-ish, 17-ish, and sometimes just scoring like around 12 fantasy points helps you enough. Justin Fields this week has a nice matchup. I know last week was not great. I think that there was some factors that really hurt his stock. You had a big wide open play. Robert Tonyan just like sit down and never play football for us at least. Again, please, just wide open down the field. Darnell Mooney, it was not obviously a Justin Fields play right to him or anything, but he kicked the ball, he dropped the ball, kicked the ball to another guy for an interception right at the end of the game. He could have, scored a game-winning Hail Mary. There were just little things throughout that game where, I feel like a lot of people will say I'm scapegoating and giving Justin Fields credit, but there were just little things in that game that if they went what they should have, or the direction they should have, he would have had a better week against a very good defense. And Justin Fields, what stands out to me is that, I argued in the offseason with some bigger guys than me in the industry that he was going to throw the ball more, and he has thrown the ball more. He was going to show flashes of upside, and he has shown flashes of upside through the year. We obviously know about the 2 weeks with 4 passing touchdowns, and he had pretty good passing yardage in those games. So I think at the end of the day, a lot of people are out on him in what his long-term value is. I'm very, very much in on Fields. I think he's a very good dual threat quarterback at the end of the day. And when a guy can have a decent day through the air and led the league in rushing last year, to me, when he has a plus matchup, he is a must start. And I think against the Cardinals, who are a top 10 matchup in points per game allowed to quarterbacks, for me, he's a must start this week.
Yeah. What happened to all those guys that said DJ Moore is going to be awful because they weren't going to throw the ball? What happened? Because they're quiet, Nick. They are quiet out there, and they usually, but I know where they're at. They're in their spreadsheets still looking like they're trying to figure out where those spreadsheets went wrong for them. But DJ Moore on the other side too, wide receiver 10. He's a league winner. DJ Moore is a league winner. Like these guys, when you're looking at what they've been able to do, and I think that's part of Fields. Like when you say like how good he's been, yeah, you start Fields. If you have Fields, you're placing him in this. I think too, like he's rushed for at least 50 yards in 50% of his games this season. I think that's good because I do think that he's going to have a good game against the secondary, but I think he's going to have a good rushing game too. But that plays into Moore as well. Like Moore has been absolutely dominant, right? He only has 10 red zone targets this year, but when he does get those targets, he's going to score touchdowns. First read share, almost 40% against too high defenses, smash there too. Like, I mean, these guys are league winners, and that is a testament to people that believed in him, like you guys too. I was a big DJ Moore guy as well, and I think this week's going to show why you drafted those guys.
Yeah, real quick, just to finish, I love those points right there. People were fading guys, not due to their talent, but due to like historical stuff, data and things like that.
Spreadsheets. Don't trust
spreadsheets. Of course. Well, teams never passed, at this and that rate in the past, and then, changed it in the coming year. Even though there was context clues, O-line was shit. They had no wide receivers last year. There was like a lot of different factors. But here you go. Justin Fields, 37 passing attempts week 1, 35 passing attempts week 4. He had 37 passing attempts week 12, 33 in week 14. And then last week he had 40 passing attempts. So big plot twist. The Bears are actually passing the ball. So we have on the list here, let's see, we have one more regular game, and then I think the rest of these will just kind of quick fire through because I don't want to take up your whole day here. One more Sunday game before the night and the Christmas slate, but anything out of this game, this is going to be a very fun one. Obviously, you're a Cowboys fan. Dolphins are an explosive offense, averaging the most total yards per game this season. So we got two very good offenses. What are we thinking about this one?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a fun game. Personally, I want a high scoring game because I got a bunch of these dudes on my rosters. That's the thing. I'm going to plant a flag. You know what I've been seeing a lot lately, and it's really been disappointing. I've been seeing a lot of negative talk about Jalen Waddle. And I don't know why that we've seen this negative talk about Jalen Waddle. Like, I don't get it. Like, I've seen people think that he's going to be outside the top 20 in Dynasty next year. You know what? He's finished as a top 20 fantasy wideout 3 of his last 4 games. So we've seen that. 15, 20, and 2. Tyreek Hill still with the ankle issue. I still think Waddle's a smash play this week with Hill in, but with Hill's ankle, you know how that works. We've seen Hill go out there, get hit in the ankle, he comes out. I love what he's going to be able to do. I think that, Dallas plays a lot of that, single high coverage, and you'll see that there. Waddle's been very good against that. Dallas has been sneaky bad against wide receivers lately. Like, they've allowed the 10th most PPR points since week 9. That's something to note too. I like Waddle in this game. I actually traded for Waddle purposely for this game in a league that I want to win really bad. I gave up Pittman in a second for Jalen Waddle. Like, I'm all aboard the Waddle train. I think Waddle's been slept on. I think in this offense, like, I don't understand why managers hate Waddle when you want people in this offense. Like, that's what you want. These are the areas there. So I think Waddle's going to have a big game this week. I think he's going to be a wide receiver one.
Yeah, I think if you roster him, you have to after last week. And I think if you look at the targets, they've been extremely consistent since the bye. You know, he's had 8 targets in every single one of those games. There's been weeks in the past where he's had, 5 targets here, 5 targets there, 6 targets here. But now, since the bye, 8 targets at least in every single game. So that's a good sign. And you said it, you want pieces of these offenses. And I think in this specific game, whoever you roster, that's probably going to be catching the ball. I think you need to play. I think you obviously CeeDee Lamb's had a phenomenal season. Jalen Waddle, like you mentioned. I think even a guy like Brandon Cooks might be a decent play just because, again, it's going to be 2 very good offenses just throwing haymakers at each other. So great point there. This will be the last one here. This will be the last one we cover. It's the Sunday night game. And then I'm going to ask you one question after this, and then we're going to wrap things up. But Patriots versus Broncos, Sunday night football. Zeke, I think you look at Zeke, the Broncos are a very good matchup to running backs. You mentioned the Bears playing better defense over the Broncos, but they're a very good matchup. Allow the most rushing yards per game. We knew back, not last week, but 2 weeks ago, he had, 29 touches, just complete workhorse role, 91% of the snaps and 87% of the snaps played the last 2 games. I'm thinking it's a Zeke bounce back week just because he's going to touch the ball a lot in this one. Are you on board with playing him this week, or do you have some hesitation?
I can't be a hypocrite because I always say volume matters, and snap rate matters. And he's getting up to 80%, right? Like, so I think that's tough. The weird thing is the matchup with Kansas City last week. Like, it was a good matchup. He just didn't perform very well. I'm still, I think you start him. You have to, right? Like, Denver's giving up the 4th highest yards after contact, 7th most rushing yards per game. Ramondre's still not practicing. Like, if you're looking for any upside with volume, it's Zeke. Like, and I think that's how it is. It's funny that, Zeke's still in it. That's my guy. Everybody knows I'm a Cowboy fan. Zeke's always been my dude. I hope that he balls out just because I think people left him for dead. Still people do. People can't trade away Zeke right now. People don't want Zeke there. I think he has a fun matchup. I'm all aboard. Yeah, you can plug Zeke in your lineup, and I think you'll be pretty comfortable with that.
All right, I'm gonna read off a couple of stats here, and I want you to let me know, is there any hope? Is there any hope here? It's 2 very quick stats. Progression from 6 to 7 targets the last 2 weeks, coming off of 74 receiving yards, had a decent day through the air. It's a top 12 matchup, I believe, for points per game allowed to wide receivers. The Patriots. Is there any hope for my guy Jerry Jeudy this week?
No.
Oh, no, all right. Somebody had to tell me this. I asked my wife. She said, sure. She don't know anything about football.
He's wide receiver 57 right now, man. Like, I don't know. If you want to, you can start him. But, like, I would not put him in my lineup. I know you're a Jeudy stan. That's your dude. You love him. It
hurts.
I mean, sure. I mean, he has upside. But, like, where the touchdowns are going. It's Sutton. So, like, I don't know, man. I'm staying away from that matchup altogether.
Yeah, that was encouraging to see last week, some decent yardage, but I just think the lack of, like, all the touchdowns going to Sutton has just been such an impact on Jeudy this year. I think if he would have, like, split some of those touchdowns with Courtland Sutton, maybe he'd have some decent weeks because he's finishing some of these games with like 10, 11, maybe 13 was his high. If he had some touchdowns, he would have a better season. But yeah, it's looking like a huge dud as far as preseason takes go. So I'm going to ask you a question. We got 3 games here. I'll let you think about it here for a second, but I want a Christmas Day sleeper. So we got 3 games on Christmas: Raiders versus Chiefs, Giants versus Eagles, Ravens versus 49ers. Maybe a guy that you are debating playing, maybe a guy, or some people are debating playing, maybe a guy that kind of under the radar, a guy that maybe isn't just an obvious start that you feel like is a sleeper in any one of those 3 games. I'll start in case you need time to think. I don't think he's going to score 20 points. All right. I don't know if he has the upside to score 20 points. He's had some flashes: 17.5 points, 14.2 points, 13.5 points. It's a really nice matchup for wide receivers. I think he's the number 1 target. I think he's the most reliable guy out of the slot. I like, in maybe a deeper league, Wan'Dale Robinson against the Eagles. I think JSN didn't have a great day against him last week, but he found ways to be successful. I think that we know the Eagles are a good team, but you have to throw against them because their offense is very good, but they're, vulnerable to the wide receiver position. And I think Wan'Dale's had a couple weeks where he's scoring okay fantasy points. So in a deeper league, maybe you're not going to get 20 points, but if you can get maybe like 12 to 15, I think Wan'Dale might be an okay play.
It's funny because I'm staying with the Giants, which is disgusting, but I'm going to go Darius Slayton. I think Slayton is an interesting play because since week 10, we've seen his target share rise up almost 15, 16%. Last week, he had 21% target share, so you're starting to see that go his way. He led the team in receptions and 63 yards last week, too. And the Eagles' defense has been suspect, kind of like what you mentioned, too. Yeah. I mean, Rondale's right there, too. Third highest PPR points to target to the receivers on the outside. Slayton fits that role really well. I think he's a dart throw. I think him and Robinson are good dart throws, though. Like, if you're looking for, like, dart throws and, like, deep guys, one of these guys is going to do it. We might need to have a bet to see who finishes with more PPR points. But I think it's either Slayton or Robinson, but I'll go Slayton just because on the outside, the Eagles are definitely more suspect at perimeter wide receivers.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, Wan'Dale Robinson can catch like 6 passes, and Darius Slayton can catch 2 and probably finish with the same receiving yard totals at the end of the day. Slayton has 5 weeks above 17 yards per reception, so that just says what he brings to the table. But that'll do it. We went over an hour here. Appreciate Kevin's time. Make sure you are following him on Twitter at DuBois_22, which is tagged within this video. Kevin, anything you want to plug, talk about as we close the stream out here?
Yeah, what I'll say is we have every year, we started this last year, we do a rookie guide. So for football guys, and we did the first one that was free for everybody. It was over 100 pages long, good graphics, all that stuff. And it's to prepare you guys for your rookie drafts. I'm pretty sure I gave Nick one for free, but don't tell my bosses. So this year we're doing another one. So this is going to be even bigger. We got a bunch of fun stuff planned. So be on the lookout that for football guys. We're going to be dropping that in early 2024. It's a lot of work for me, Christian Williams, and Jeff Bell. We do a lot of college stuff, but we do a lot of our dynasty stuff there. So if you've ever thought about maybe joining football guys or doing those things, that is one perk to all the other perks that it has on top of the million other things that's there, is that we do drop that rookie guide. This year won't be free. The first one's not going to be free, but if you DM me, I can show you a couple snippets of what we're doing. And so just be on the lookout. If you're playing a dynasty league, be on the lookout for that. It's a lot of fun.
Crucial content that I don't trust from pretty much anybody. I don't consume a lot of content, but when it comes to that sort of stuff, I'm looking at what Kevin and his guys end up producing at the end of the day. But I vouch for this guy more than anybody in the space. So if you are following me and watching the stream and you don't follow him for some reason, make sure you're doing that. Again, out of everybody in the space, I would vouch for him above everybody. So thanks, Kevin, for coming on the show. Holiday season, so enjoy it with your guys' families. I know it's a stressful time getting everything lined up for the holiday, and fantasy football can be stressful, and so can families and all this stuff too. But really enjoy this time of year. It flies by, and enjoy the time with family. So thank you guys for tuning in, and have a good week.